Hey everyone, and welcome to another Konoha Reviews. It's October, which means Halloween is upon us, and that of course also means that we have a whole bunch of new horror games coming out. Today we talk about Amnesia Rebirth, the first actual Amnesia sequel made by the original studio. It was weird to me how this sequel was being released without a lot of hype behind it. I did not even know it was even coming out until a few weeks prior. But maybe, if judging by the end result, one can see why. The Amnesia series and all the other games in the same spirit have a very interesting history. Though many people think of Amnesia the Dark Descent to be the first and foremost game by Frictional Games, in reality that team also made a couple of games before that called Penumbra. They were modest hits, and I've actually played both the main entries and really liked them. The first Penumbra is a great entry for horror newcomers. The game is not that scary, has some varied puzzles, and is overall pretty engaging. The most notable thing is that one can indeed see it was made with a pretty low budget. The Penumbra sequel improved on a lot of things, and also introduced some way scarier sections, but it wasn't until Amnesia the Dark Descent until they gained worldwide renown. The game was released in 2010, and it already gained a reputation for being really scary, but what definitely helped its success were the many Let's Plays that would follow on YouTube as the horror Let's Player was born. There were many who tackled Amnesia at that time, and of course the most notably was PewDiePie back in the day, who helped create memes for this game, including the Barrels and Stefano. Never forget. What also was in its favor was that Amnesia had a great custom map tool, and there were many great custom stories and maps created by other players that were even scarier than the vanilla game. Since Amnesia was such a huge hit back in the day, I do remember very well that for the first sequel, Amnesia Machine for Pigs, there was a lot of hype and anticipation behind it. To many, Amnesia stood at the top of horror games that had set the bar, and many hoped that they would improve upon this. But Machine for Pigs turned out to be one of the biggest disappointments, since it had almost nothing that made the original so great. Machine for Pigs was not made by Frictional Games, but instead the Chinese Room, who made the walking simulators Dear Esther and later also Everyone Gone to the Rapture. They are great storytellers, and I would agree that the story of Machine for Pigs is very good, but gameplay-wise, there's barely anything there, and it's quite a lackluster walking simulator in retrospect. And so it was up to the original team to prove that they still had what it took, and they made a game in a different universe in the form of Soma. Soma focused on underwater horror, but also was a lot more high-tech, and this drastic change of tone in horror made it to where it felt very original, new, and the story was also great with some real philosophical depth. I really liked Soma, and I believe that the game sold pretty well, but many agreed that it did not put the bar above the first Amnesia, and I guess after that, the team worked on a new Amnesia game that we now get with Rebirth. First, let me begin that this game was plagued by a number of things, and I have to admit that it ruined a bit of the experience for me. Now this will most likely be fixed and not an issue for anyone playing this later, but I will probably lower the score by maybe half a point compared to what it would be if I had played it a year later and it was all patched. I think this is fair since games like Battlefield 4 and Halo Master Chief Collection were also criticized by reviewers for their multiplayer being unstable and crap, though later with updates it ran smooth as butter. My issues were that first there was no exe file when released. This was not long after resolved, but many other people had the same issue. Then the next day an update had made it to where the game had no access to my save files. I would be forced to start a new game and lose the 4 hours of progress I made the day before. Luckily someone figured out how to import them back, but the worst thing was that when I then played after that, the game would not save even once. It would not give me the achievements, and when I stopped the game and wanted to continue later on, my save files were not there, and this time there was no way to get them back. So another few hours were lost, and in reality all that crap I had to deal with this game was the real horror. But anyway, hopefully this will all get patched and will not be an issue for those playing this later. Let's now finally talk about the game. Amnesia Rebirth follows the story of Tassi, a French woman who is going on an expedition in Africa with a team that includes her husband Salim, a native of Algeria. During the opening cutscene, the plane crashes and everyone has gone from the plane except you. Of course, as the title suggests, you have amnesia, and it's now up to you to retrace your and your team's steps to find out what is going on. Where the original Amnesia was in a dark castle, and Soma was in the ocean, Rebirth decides to present us with a new theater in the form of a desert. This can be dangerous since deserts of course don't offer a whole lot of varied terrain, and it's indeed something that wears on you after a while, but we will talk about that later. From what I understand, Rebirth still runs on the engine that Dark Descent also ran on, though heavily modified. The game actually looks quite good, though one cannot call it current gen by any means. It looks more a final year release of Xbox 360 or launch games for PlayStation 4. The most notable and beautiful thing in the game is definitely the lighting, and it can create some really beautiful images when you see the light shine in the dark halls or caves, creating a lot of atmosphere. Amnesia has always been heavy on the exploration part as well, so you will find a lot of photographs, notes, and letters. In the beginning, there will be a lot of reading, and though I'm not against this, it all can feel a little bit much and all over the place. There's so much reading to do that it has a very slow start, and it will take a while before you come to an area where you have some proper exploration to do before stopping every 20 seconds to look at another note. The main reason why there is so much to read is because you find notes and memories from multiple people from the crew. The original Amnesia had only one main character, and so there were plenty of notes to find, but it was sporadic, and there was enough spacing in between. I will say that the voice acting in Rebirth is very good, and all of the characters feel unique and well portrayed. After strolling through the desert a bit, you will come to a large cave system, and will be here for a while. The game takes its time to build everything up, and not put you up against an enemy or monster immediately, and I always appreciate this. Now a big thing with the Amnesia series also is resource management. When you stay into the dark for too long, your character will slowly go insane. To prevent this from happening, you will have to light candles and torches, or use the lantern that runs on oil once you get it. This time, however, you get matches that you can use to illuminate rooms with by lighting candles. But the matches only stay lit for 10 seconds or so. Now I understand that matches will soon go out, and this gives some extra stress on making sure you don't feel too much at ease, but having only 10 seconds time to light things manages to create a whole nother problem. I think 10 seconds is so little time that instead of feeling scared and looking for a torch or light, you frantically go and walk around the room to find all the light sources. You light them quickly, and then thereafter, you are going to retrieve your steps and explore the room or hall. This meant I would throw myself into the dark and unknown territory way too much and kind of ruin that slow exploratory nature that the original game had. And it's an easy fix. Having the match last only 30 or 40 seconds would already make such a huge difference because you knew that you had to use the match sparingly, but at least you had enough time to traverse a room with it and explore it while also looking for a light source. In the cave section, another new gameplay element gets introduced in the form of portals, which you can open with a weird supernatural device that is stuck on your wrist. Throughout the levels, you will find floating rocks that give off a green light, and when you see those and you point your gadget at it, a portal will open that will transport you to another world. The first time this happens, it's actually really cool and impressive. It has something occult, something Lovecraftian about it. It's so mysterious, and you arrive at this green dystopian looking world with giant, ominous feminine statues in the distance overlooking a shattered and barren landscape. It resembles the reality in movies like The Matrix in more than only the aesthetics. And so the first time you come here, your mind is racing with the possibilities of what this might be and where the story can go. And for me personally, the first 2 hours of the game were the real highlight, though I like the final hour a lot as well. The 4 or 5 hours in between, however, are a different story, but we will talk about that soon. In this alien world, it's also where you get your first proper scary moments. The creators do some brilliant things here. The first time where you think you are seeing an enemy, you automatically try to crouch and hide from it. You start taking a route around it to avoid its gaze, only to notice after a while that it's not actually an enemy, but a dead corpse. They really psyched me out with that moment, and I felt that they got me. Well done, developers. They also really got me with the first proper jump scare, as you see something move in the distance, but it's very small and difficult to see, so I put my face closer to the monitor, only to be surprised by a proper jump scare right in front of me. Cheap, but very effective. Shortly after, you come to a giant French-held fort. You will spend a long time in this section solving puzzles and progressing the story. This section is actually really well done, because it's pretty open and you can solve things in different order while still providing a very tense and pretty scary experience. Your main two goals are to make contact with a radio inside one building and creating a tank shell that can be fired by an old French tank in a different building. They once again have some pretty good jump scares here, though they did not get me as much as the first one did, and it's also because the creature design very clearly is not all that scary looking. With the scares at this area and the behavior of the creature, they don't really do anything you haven't seen before. If you've played Amnesia the Dark Descent, you kinda can expect what happens. When I was done and escaped from the building that had the creature in it, I headed to another building where I had to manufacture a tank shell. The puzzle here is great and really goes back to that old school Penumbra and Amnesia feeling, where you have to find different ingredients, but then also still have to work them down into different components before being able to combine them. The puzzles in Rebirth are great as they require the thinking in logical physics, good understanding of the environment, and just logic. I already had that with the first Penumbra and Amnesia, and this is no exception. I had my head scratching a couple of times with some puzzles, but never had to look up a guide. I will say that the puzzles in the 1937 world are a lot better and more fun since they are the more logical puzzles. The puzzles that get presented in the Apocalypse world often revolve around moving a cone that shines light to different switches and finding batteries to open doors or other functions. However, I will still give it praise once again for the ability to do things in different orders. When I was busy gathering the parts to make the tank shell, I read that one component was in the building that the creature was in, the one I just had escaped from. So I had to go back in there knowing that he might be lurking around somewhere. That experience was very tense and creepy and very effective, and could have gone a lot differently if I had done the order of the two buildings in reverse. And so, as I said, the first 2 hours of the game had me pretty excited and felt pretty good, but unfortunately, it's after these 2 hours that the game takes a dive into the familiar territory, which I think is its biggest fault. It's pretty much after you sink with your tank into the underground layer under the fort, but for the most part after this, you will be walking through underground tombs, tunnels, caves, hallways, etc. And it's all dark, dusty, and brown. Yeah, there are still parts where you go to the apocalyptic world with the portals, but for the most of the time you will also be walking through narrow hallways over and over and over again. Though the puzzles in the 1937 world are quite good, as mentioned before, the puzzles in the other world are often battery and switch related and don't feel as new or intuitive. Even if there are sections that might seem quite original, like a theater room where bodies get displayed, you have to get into one of the capsules yourself to be transported, it just fails to impress. We have seen things and scenes like that before, and it dawned on me very quickly that this game in no way does anything new or tries to up the bar. The gameplay and feel of the game are that of a 10-year-old product, and there have by now been other horror games that have by far surpassed this premise and old school design. Again, the final hour of the game is once more quite exciting as the story picks up and a lot is happening. But in those 4 to 5 hours before that, not much is happening and they try to keep the story pretty vague, which slows things down. There are also some pretty predictable story beats, including the loss of a child, though the dream sections that also hint at this and possible newborn one can feel pretty original, though they are very, very brief. And speaking of children, a big theme about this game is childbirth and motherhood. Tassie is pregnant with another child after losing her first, and the story revolves around a queen of a different civilization who wants nothing more than to be a mother. During the middle section, you will be walking through all those dark hallways and tunnels, and the creature that you will face here is once again not very scary or even that original. It's just kinda a golem-like creature, and we've seen this type of design in many other horror games already. You will encounter it quite a lot, and after only a short while, I already grew numb to it, and it never really scared me again. In fact, the whole game never really scared me, except for those 2 initial scares I told you about earlier. Because the creature design is so familiar, but also because the gameplay is dated with you having to hide, then hit control to crouch even more, and just wait until the creature walks past, it just fails to be all that frightening or threatening. I will say one detail I liked is that at one point it becomes clear that the creatures are your former crewmates. One of those crewmates is a South African, and thus he speaks Afrikaans. Since Afrikaans is so similar to Dutch, and I'm a Dutchman, I was able to tell what he was saying before they even revealed that the creature was the South African. There's a whole section where you're moving through this maze where entranceways are blocked, and it's quite confusing, but also just not very scary. There are multiple chase sequences, and they can be exciting, but I've also seen them done 100 times already, and better, in other horror games. Probably the chase that is a standout is the one where you're moving through water as a creature is following you through something of a sewer system. But it never reaches even close to getting as scary as the invisible water monster from Dark Descent. I also had some bugs and glitches during the playthrough, where creatures were clearly not standing where they were supposed to. I had one of the golem-like creatures lean against nothing in the middle of the room, and it was clear he needed to be standing next to a wall further down so that I could sneak past. But because he was glitched, I had to run past him, which triggered it to run after me, but I still managed to get away unscathed. The final creature you face is also not all that original, since we have seen a similar design in something like Harry Potter, and even in having a bright light to shine in your direction and casting shadows is also something we have seen before. It still looks cool though, seeing all those shadows dance as the light moves around the room. It's also with this creature where you have to do most of the walking around and solving things while the enemy is patrolling the area. Most of the other creatures just appear and can hurt you in very scripted events, but here there are multiple rooms you will have to traverse while the creature is walking around on its own. But again, we know this gameplay type already, and the creature will also pretty much kill you if you step into the light in one go. I have talked before about how the gameplay of horror games where you cannot do anything but just have to hide, and if you are found it's an immediate death, is so dated and really should be reinvented. There are some games that, for example, give you a very limited amount of ammo to fight off the monsters, but there's so little that you have to make that choice to use it now, but you might get in trouble later when you need it and don't have any. Now you can still struggle when a creature grabs you, but with these later creatures, more often than not, it's a one-hit kill. So I just got really bored, to be honest, with the midsection of the game, and not even the awesome aesthetics of the few glimpses I got from the apocalyptic world could save it, as for the most of the time, I was just walking through the same looking hallways and rooms. Luckily, the ending does pick up again and has some very cool twists and turns and even a choice of different endings, which got me thinking for a while. There are 4 different endings to my knowledge, and the choice you are forced to make is pretty severe, and I like that I had to think about it for a moment. So overall, a pretty promising beginning and a pretty good ending, but the majority of the game, which consists of the middle part, just feels all too familiar and dated. In no way does this game do anything to surpass Amnesia the Dark Descent, or Soma for that matter. It's better than Machine for Pigs, but that's easy pickings of course. This game, in terms of gameplay, scares, and enemy behavior, feels like a 10-year-old game, and by now has been surpassed by many other games. It still has some pretty cool puzzles, but even then, it's really only the puzzles in 1937 that stand out. Well, maybe the one puzzle, where you get to choose how to torture a victim to get his life energy, is a standout with the other world. But other than that, it's the earlier mentioned batteries and cone moving. Last compliment I want to give it to though, is that there are some optional sections for explorers that you can totally miss but still have dangers lurking around them with patrolling creatures, meaning you can get some more background story at the risk of getting killed. But even this does not save it from having the game feel painfully average in terms of experience, and thus in the end, Amnesia Rebirth gets a 7.1. The fact that I had the technical difficulties of course also did not help, but it's just overall so plain feeling. It doesn't take risks, and I feel like I probably will not play this game again in the future. I have played Dark Descent multiple times, and loved it, and still get scared in certain sections. Soma I have also played twice, but this game just cannot touch its 2 older brothers. But as I said, there are some cool things to enjoy with Rebirth, including the opening section and finale, and thus, I could still recommend it to some, but that is only after you have tried many of the other and better horror titles that are available out there.